back, boxing fans, to another great show with Sean Unboxing. So today we obviously had two big cards, one from DAZN, one from Top Rank. Top Rank's card was primarily showcase fights. Robsy Ramirez did what he had to do in his showcase fight, had a spectacular knockout win. Teofimo Lopez, unfortunately, did not look great. Really struggled and gave up rounds and got hit way too much against a really mediocre opponent. So I won't say that it was a very good a performance from Teo. It was a very piss poor performance, if anything, especially against a guy of that caliber. But this is what Teo does. He consistently underperforms against lesser opposition. And that's one of the things that people do point out and do hold against him. And then, of course, we had the DAZN fight card, which had quite a few 50-50 fights, but, a few of them not the most of exciting matchups. But one fight that did not let us down was the fight that I was looking forward to outside of Bivol versus Beterbiev. This was my most anticipated fight of 2024, and that was, of course, Bam Rodriguez versus Juan Francisco Estrada. What a fucking performance. Going into this fight, I was eager to have Bam prove himself, but at the same time, I was eager for Estrada to confirm who he was, right? To really make a statement and really show that he was this really elite level, high level fighter that people have been talking about for a long time, and talking about him being on the pound for pound list. For Bam, this was by and far the best opponent he's been in with. So based on that, it was questionable to know how dominant he was going to be against this level of a performer. Obviously, we've seen him in with Sonny Edwards, but Sonny Edwards is a smaller fighter, not a big power puncher, a guy who's more of a mover and a boxer. We saw him against Rungvisai and Quadras, but these are two opponents that Estrada had already beaten previously, convincingly, stopping Quadras and putting a masterclass performance against Rungvisai. So this was a huge step up for Bam Rodriguez, and because of that, I didn't really know how things were going to turn out. When I made my prediction, I did predict that Bam would win by unanimous decision. He was the younger, fresher, more explosive fighter, and I could see him winning that fight more easily than I could see Estrada winning. But my heart was still favoring Estrada to pull it out. But what Bam did today in that ring was fucking unbelievable. I made a statement after or during the fight or after the fight that I think Bam Rodriguez is the best Mexican or Mexican-American fighter I've ever seen in boxing. This was a guy who has far more versatility in his game than a lot of historically great Mexican fighters I've seen. You can talk about Ricardo Lopez. You can talk about, of course, Salvador Sanchez, two fighters who obviously were great fighters and far more versatile than the stereotypical Mexican fighter. But what Bam has done, he's really sort of accumulated that American style with that Mexican style and cemented it into what could only be described as unbelievable, right? A little bit of Lomachenko in there, a little bit of Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. He brings so much together into his skill set that when he gets in there, you're always surprised at how he goes about destroying really high level fighters. I mean, I was surprised the way he beat Sonny Edwards. I knew Sonny was a good fighter who probably was going to control the distance with his jab and his feet and force Bam to hunt him down and prove that he had some good cutoff game. And he surprised me enormously. And then, of course, today, I cannot even describe what a fucking performance it was. He went out there from the start and really started to establish himself from round one. I knew that Estrada was going to probably need a few rounds to shake off some of the rust, considering he's been out of the ring for so long. But Bam didn't give him any chance to rest. he just continued to get more efficient, more effective as the rounds progressed. Even though you could see Estrada was getting better as well, was starting to put his punches together, was starting to get more comfortable. But then the level he brought up, Bam continued to supersede that and just outwork and outland him with faster, sharper combination punching. Um, Even after Estrada dropped Bam Rodriguez for the first time of his career, Bam got up and proceeded to basically kick fucking Estrada's ass in that round, really making it a tough round to score because of the dominance Estrada showed in one action as opposed to the dominance that Bam showed throughout the whole round. Then he went out there and got what can only be described as a historical stoppage, comparable to what B-Hop did to Oscar De La Hoya with that great left hand that crippled and stopped De La Hoya, a guy that usually had never been stopped. Tough chin, granite chin, but that body shot was too much to bear. And that's exactly what Bam Rodriguez did against Estrada today. Caught him with two hooks to the body, switched his angle a la Lomachenko to open up an even better angle, which was just devastating. Left Estrada crumpled up on the ground, unable to get up and unable to show the tough Mexican warrior that he is. Because you knew Estrada was going to go the distance from headshots. He was going to resolve himself to continue to fight, continue to do his best, and continue to try to land good, effective punches against Bam Rodriguez. But that body shot was just too much to overcome. Of course, Estrada has said that he is going to take his rematch, which cannot be a surprise for anyone. This was a man who's taken the rematch every single time and won every single time. So, obviously he's going to jump at the chance to try to redeem his fourth loss on his resume and try to revenge this loss. But at this point, I do not see how Juan Francisco Estrada is going to be able to cope with the younger, faster, sharper, bigger, longer, harder puncher in Bam Rodriguez. Generally what happens in cases like this, the fighter that scored the knockout, pretty much ends up getting a faster knockout the second time around. So I would not be surprised if that's exactly what unfolds in fight number 2. But what a performance from Bam Rodriguez. And this is kind of like how I felt, of course, when Tank Davis went out there and destroyed Frank Martin. Maybe I'm a prisoner of the moment, but I thought, of course, Tank Davis's devastating stoppage of Frank Martin was a great statement win. And I think the same thing with Bam Rodriguez, but even more so, because you look at the level of opponent that Bam did this to compared to what Tank Davis did, and it cannot be compared. So this definitely elevates Bam Rodriguez into my top 5 pound for pound. So let's break down my top 10 pound for pound list. Obviously, pound for pound, a lot of it depends on what you're doing now, right? Your present position in the sport, not based on the legacy. This is not a legacy award. This is what have you done for me lately, right? And so this is going to be telling you how my list unfolds, because it's what have you done for me lately. So at number 1, Alexander Usyk, the 2-weight undisputed champion, currently heavyweight undisputed champion after beating Tyson Fury, a fighter that was 6 inches taller, 8 inches longer, 50 pounds heavier, but yet still found a way to overcome that behemoth to become a 2-weight undisputed champion, joining, of course, 2 other fighters that are going to be in my top 3. Usyk, I think, deserved it. He deserved it based on the mountain he had to climb to put himself in this position. At number 2, Bud Crawford. Obviously, Bud Crawford has a big fight coming up this August 3rd to become a 4-weight world champion. That'll just be another excellent accolade added to already a fantastic career. We know Bud is already a 2-weight undisputed champion. Now he's trying to become a 4-weight world champion. joining, of course, Canelo Alvarez and Inouye, two other pound-for-pound fighters that have already accomplished that. Uh, so it's very intriguing to see how that fight's going to unmatch. Obviously, we'll know more about Crawford and where he ranks on the pound-for-pound list after that fight. But at this point, he's number 2 on my list, and quite deserving. I know some people would rather have him number 1, specifically because of the color of his skin, but my list has nothing to do with race. It has to do with what are you doing and what have you done. At number 3, I don't know how you could talk about a pound for pound list but not have Inouye at number 3 on your list. Anybody that's not putting Inouye on their top 3 list is just really a hater and just exposing themselves, because Inouye is currently a 4-weight world champion, something that Crawford is trying to achieve. He's also a 2-weight undisputed champion, something both Crawford and Usyk have already achieved. So we're going to give Usyk and Crawford credit for doing that, but we wouldn't give Inouye credit? That sounds downright stupid. But of course, people making these statements, they are downright stupid, so what would you expect? Inouye is obviously dominating and destroying the competition, and obviously we're interested to see what he does next. His next opponent isn't really a great opponent, so it's not really going to be the kind of fight that elevates him higher on the pound for pound list. So I can understand him pretty much being at that number 3 position for the next foreseeable future, until he moves up to either 126 pounds to try to become a 5-weight world champion, or unless one of these really great, exciting pound for pound quality fighters jumps up and tries to take his shine, and that would be obviously Bam and Junta Nakatani. So Inouye number 3. At number 4, and this is really jumping up the pound for pound list, but justifiably so. What a fucking performance today. Bam Rodriguez, number 4, pound for pound. What a sublime performance from what can only be described as one of the best American fighters in the sport today. At number 5, as I say, I'm a prisoner of the moment. I have Tank Davis at number 5. Obviously, for Tank to move above these other fighters above him, he needs to do what they've been doing, fighting elite level of opposition and making statement fights and wins against them. And then obviously he's going to put himself right in the mix for potentially the number 1 position. But at this point, he's doing exactly what he has to do against the level of competition he's in with, destroying them, dominating them, getting them the fuck out of there in sensational fashion. So Tank Davis is number 5. I know some people say, well, shouldn't Canelo Alvarez be above him? At this point, I don't know how you'd put Canelo Alvarez above Tank Davis, Inouye, Usyk, Crawford, or Bam Rodriguez, because these fighters have shown you that right now they're fucking peaking, right? Whereas Canelo Alvarez obviously is on a slide. His performances are good. Being number 6 on a pound for pound list is no negativity. It's just obviously you've taken a few losses. Your performances over the last while haven't been nearly as dominant as they were previously. And because of that, obviously we see that, there's a bit of a slide in your performances. And because of that, obviously some people are superseding you and passing you on the pound for pound list. And this is not hate or criticism. Being in the top 10 of a pound for pound list is fucking fantastic, phenomenal. That's exactly what you would hope from any fighter in the world today. All this back and forth about where you're on a list, that's just semantics and people looking for reasons to push narratives. The reality is being number 6 in this list is fantastic. If he does anything super exciting moving forward, like beating a David Benavidez, then obviously he could easily jump ahead of multiple fighters that are listed above him, right? Or if he was to jump up to 175 pounds and become undisputed and a 2-weight undisputed champion by beating a better Biever Bivol, that would obviously catapult him, potentially to the number 1 position on the list once again. So it's in his hands. It's a matter of what he does to justify it. So at number 7, I have Dmitry Bivol. Obviously, Bivol is coming off of a dominant performance in his last fight on the undercard of the 5-on-5 tournament in Saudi Arabia. He's obviously a guy who's scheduled to fight in an undisputed 175-pound unification fight as well. Obviously, that fight has been delayed because of an injury, but this is a guy who already beat Zurdo Ramirez, currently a cruiserweight world champion, a guy that already beat pound-for-pound top 6 fighter Canelo Alvarez. So having him at number 7 is something that he deserves for sure. And obviously, if he beats Beterbiev, he's going to be jumping up this list as an undisputed fighter as well. So, once again, it's in his hands to control his fate. And when you look at my pound-for-pound list, that's what it is. Everything is nothing to do with me. It has to do with the fighters, and they control their fate. The fights they take, the fights they win, the manner that they do it in, that's what justifies where they are on the list. It has nothing to do with me and my favoritism or bias or any of that type of thing. So then we get to number 8, and that of course would be Artur Beterbiev, a fighter who is one of the most dominant fighters in boxing today, a 3-belt unified champion at 175, a fighter currently with a 100% KO ratio, and a guy who's scheduled to fight Bivol this October. I think October is the official date, and if he beats Bivol, obviously that's going to be a huge legacy victory for him, becoming undisputed, and at this point of his career, being almost 40 years old, it's the final diamond on the crown, so to speak, right? And obviously after that, potentially, maybe we could get a Canelo Alvarez Beterbiev fight, right? I would think at that point it might be something that's really viable. At number 9, an old war horse has bounced back and become a name again. Vasily Lomachenko, number 9 on my pound-for-pound list. Obviously, he's fallen off after his loss to Teofimo Lopez and then his loss to Devin Haney. Even though it was controversial, you can't really put a guy on a list based on a controversial loss. But he's bounced back with significant wins. Now is a champion once again, and in the conversation to potentially fight Tank Davis, the number 5 pound-for-pound fighter on my list. And obviously, if Lomachenko was to beat him, that would solidify him as a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter, justifiably so. For Tank Davis, a win over Lomachenko definitely is a great win and potentially moves him higher up this pound-for-pound list, as you would expect it would, finally taking on a real legitimate top-level fighter. And depending on how he goes about doing it, if he was able to do, example, what Bam Rodriguez did to Juan Francisco Estrada today to Lomachenko, what a fucking statement that would be. What a statement that would be. It'd be hard-pressed not to put him in the top 2 or potentially number 1 position on the pound-for-pound list based on a victory of that fashion. But currently, Lomachenko is at number 9, and I think it's justified. At number 10, this was a position where I had some questions. There's 2 fighters that I kind of look at this position right now. They're both in similar situations, right? But I had to sort of look at the way they performed, and that kind of was the difference currently, them being in this position. Obviously, depending on what each of them does moving forward, they could overlap and move forward on this list. But the 2 fighters I was putting in this position right now were obviously Shakur Stevenson and Junto Nakatani. Both of these fighters are currently 3-weight world champions, right? Junto Nakatani just became a 3-weight world champion by beating the champion for the WBC title, the same guy who beat Donaire for that vacant title. So he'd won it significantly, Santiago, by beating a top fighter, and Junto Nakatani went in there and demolished him to claim that title for the 3rd weight class that he is now currently a champion. And obviously what we hope he does is go on to unify titles at bantamweight, potentially move up and face Inoue in what would be the biggest fight in Japanese history, or even potentially face Bam Rodriguez. Bam moving up to try to become a three-weight world champion, trying to go through Junta Nakatani to accomplish that. That, my friends, would also be a fucking phenomenal, phenomenal fight. For Shakur, obviously he's also a three-weight world champion, but currently coming off of a less than stellar performance, fighting a less than stellar opponent in his next fight. Not a world champion, winning a vacant world title. So because of that, I had to put Junta Nakatani just above Shakur Stevenson, based on what he's been doing. And, you know, as I say, depending on what both of these fighters do moving forward, that could easily flip-flop them on this list. And obviously there's other fighters lower, like Devin Haney, who obviously just fell off because of his poor performance against Ryan Garcia, and other fighters like David Benavidez and others, Teofimo Lopez, who all are potentially pound-for-pound top 10 fighters. But as I mentioned already, a lot of this depends on them. What are they going to do to elevate themselves on this list? You know, talking through social media, capping for other fighters, that shit is fine for grabbing attention, but it's not anything that's going to elevate you on a pound for pound list. Ultimately, what's going to do that is by making the fights that matter. Unification fights, fights against elite top dudes, and then making statements in those fights, right? Teofimo Lopez, of course, had an opportunity to make a highlight, you know, today in his performance. But instead of doing that, he underperformed, showing why he's probably not eligible to be on the pound for pound list. He also took on an opponent that was a cherry pick, not the kind of opponent that's really going to highlight and move him forward on anyone's pound for pound list, as opposed to trying to take on a unification opponent, which would have been far more significant. But that is my current pound for pound top 10 list, and I think, man, it's a fucking great list. Literally, when you think about Usyk number 1, Crawford number 2, Inoue number 3, Bam Rodriguez number 4, Tank Davis at number fucking 5. What a new generation of fucking great fighters that are right there on that list. Obviously, Bam, Tank, and Inoue, all younger than Crawford and Usyk, and in position to potentially take over that pound for pound position. And then under them, obviously Canelo Alvarez, the old warhorse, not going to be around forever. Bivol, not too old, obviously quite a few years left in him. Better BF, obviously a guy like Canelo, Usyk, and Crawford, a guy that, you know, maybe by the end of 2025 is going to be no longer active and no longer ranked on this pound for pound list. So that potentially will be 4 positions vacant and opened for this list moving forward, with obviously a lot of great young fighters trying to earn their way on this list. Then, of course, after that, you have Lomachenko, another old warhorse, who potentially is 1 knockout loss away from retirement, or potentially 1 win away from being a top 5 pound for pound fighter, depending on what happens with his Tank Davis fight that people have been talking about being this November. Cross your fingers, let's hope it happens. That, my friends, would be a true test. And then, of course, Junta Nakatani, another young up-and-comer at number 10. And then, of course, just behind him, Shakur Stevenson, another young superstar fighter who obviously I expect to make a huge statement next weekend in his fight against some unknown German fighter who I can't pronounce his name. But with that level of opponent, you expect him to make quite a statement. Something, of course, that Teo was unable to do today, but that both Bam Rodriguez and Robson Ramirez did fantastically. But let me know what you think about my top 10 pound for pound list, and, you know, tell me what areas you think could be changed, or what other fighters potentially could be on this list. Thanks for watching. Leave your comments below. Peace out, everyone, and enjoy what's left of your weekend. Cheers.